Morning, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday. I'd like to welcome you to the Super Strategies for Recruiting and Retaining Students with Disabilities. This is our fourth and final webinar in this amazing series that we've been working on. If you are interested in any of the other webinars that we've done to recruit and retain other special populations, please visit us on our website. We'll have some information on that later. And all of the Super Strategies are available. All the webinars are available on our website. If you're interested in the hard paper copies, send either Casey or I, or send an email to ICSPS@ilstu.edu, and we will mail out a packet of all the super strategies for each of the special populations to you. So if you're looking for the nice, hard, slick printed copies, please send us an email and we can mail those out. But we need your mailing address so we know where we're sending them. So this morning I'd like to welcome our two speakers. Casey Anderson is our Technology Coordinator at the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And today, as we're talking about retaining and recruiting students with disabilities, we are featuring Jacob Rung, who is the Coordinator for Academic Support Services from Carl Sandburg. All of the attendees are going to be in listen-only mode, so if you have a question, please post that in the question pane. Or if you would like to speak and have availability to speak, please raise your hand and we can unmute you. We want this to be an interactive session. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to Casey, and Casey and Jacob will talk about our super strategies.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Casey Anderson, the Technology Coordinator with ICSPS. And before we really get started, I want to just say a word about ICSPS. Our mission is to create, support, and deliver professional development for career, tech ed, and adult education professionals across Illinois. We provide technical assistance, develop publication, and facilitate program improvement strategies for our partners as they relate to college transition, recruitment, retention, and completion, encouraging achievement of special population students. So with that brief description, you can kind of see our mission statement. And one of the reasons I bring it up at this point is because, as Amy indicated, we have developed a series of professional support webinars that you can go back and access for other special population students. I also really quickly want to mention that because we're focusing on services for students with disabilities today, one of the relevant resources that we have provided in the past was a webinar series dealing specifically with information technology and web accessibility. So that can be accessed on our website as well. There are two separate webinars. One actually details all the legislation that guides federal and Illinois programs on web accessibility and the requirements that you'd have related to web accessibility. The other has been broken up into a series of 3 or 4 videos that walks you through the process of creating accessible documents using common programs like Word, Excel, PDF, through Adobe, all sorts of different technologies there, so that when you are creating documents, you can do it in an accessible manner. Just wanted to bring that up now because that will be something that we'll have a slight focus on today as we go through talking about services for students with disabilities. So the first thing we want to do is really define what an individual with disability, what that term means. So the term disability means, with respect to an individual, a physical or mental impairment that substantively limits one or more of the major life activities of such an individual, a record of such impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. The term impairment does not include characteristics or predisposition to illness or disease. For the purpose of Perkins special populations, an individual with disabilities can be defined as an individual who, with or without reasonable accommodation, can perform the essential functions of the employment position or academic program that such individual holds or desires to hold. Consideration shall be given to the employer's judgment as to what functions of the job are essential, and if an employee has prepared a written description before advertising or interviewing applicants for the job, this description shall be considered evidence of the essential functions of the job. And that's drawn from Section 3 of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 2010. So that's a really legal definition of individuals with disabilities. But as we go forward, one of the things that we want to take into consideration are the broad range of actual characteristics that can entail. It's very easy to consider an individual with a wheelchair as someone who has disabilities and understands some of the challenges that they will face. There are a broad range of disabilities, though, that we have to consider, including both physical and cognitive disabilities. And so one of the challenges that we will face as academic professionals who want to provide support services is anticipating some of those needs or being very adaptive for individual needs based on their very specific disability. So as far as understanding the challenges that our potential students or students in our programs can face, one of the things we want to look at is recruiting learners with disabilities into career and tech education programs, and see the challenges that pop up due to myths and stereotypes held by instructors, parents, or the learners themselves about their ability of individuals with disabilities, the requirements of CTE programs, and the individual's ability to meet those requirements. We can't overemphasize the importance of considering stereotype threat when you're recruiting and attempting to retain students with disabilities into your programs. Another key factor of this is not just the stereotypes related to the abilities of students with disabilities themselves, but the requirements of CTE programs. So there are a lot of students who could potentially disqualify themselves from a program because of actual lack of knowledge of the requirements of the trade in which they'd be entering, or the program itself, or some other stereotype related to that field that they see as a barrier, even if in reality that barrier wouldn't exist. Therefore, when designing recruitment and retention efforts of students with disabilities, it's important, as I said, to consider the wide range of students that qualify under this category and the unique barriers each individual will face. So, do not limit your efforts to removing barriers for just one type of disability. Ensure instead that you consider the potential situations that may arise for all students. So, as we go forward, I want to look at some of the recruiting strategies that we've developed, and these strategies have been designed to intentionally be very broad. Again, when you're considering students with disability, there are a wide range of specific barriers each individual will face. So we've developed these strategies to, first of all, allow them to be adapted in any way necessary to deal with those specific individual circumstances. And secondly, to allow you to adapt them and change them in the way that best suits the needs of your program, your school, and the specific population you serve. So our first recruitment strategy that we want to look at is seeking out the assistance of potential recruiting partners. I can't overstate the importance of this. When you're looking to develop a recruitment pipeline that is equitable for students with disabilities and get them into your programs, a key factor is identifying students who have disabilities and getting them information. One of the best ways to do this are work with recruiting partners who already serve that population or who have relationships in place with those individuals to help them weigh the benefits of your program and think about that individual contextualized service or opportunity that you could offer. So some of the examples we have here are secondary schools. To me, that's sort of an obvious partner because they will be funneling students into the community colleges, and students with disabilities will be in high schools or and will have learning plans that are shared with those schools. Their needs will already be known, and so by working with those schools, they can present the information to students who already make use of their services, go to them very specifically for guidance on education and career options through counselors. What we want to focus is the idea that those students have already been identified and already have a relationship with the schools, so they're a primary partner that you need to be working with to recruit. Parents groups are also important, and we've listed here include parents in recruitment and career exploration activities to encourage word-of-mouth recruitment. There are two reasons this is important. The first is it really is essential in helping dispel some of those stereotype threats, and that parents generally play a very active role in planning and moving students forward into their educational or career opportunities. So providing them with information to overcome some of the stereotypes that they may hold is also essential. Additionally, support groups for parents with students with disability, or for individuals with disabilities, that core network also allows them to communicate with each other and, as we point out here, use word of mouth to help you spread information amongst the population that will have access to potential recruits. Adult education programs are also very important. So when developing partnerships with adult education programs at your institution or around the community, they can assist you in identifying students with disability that can be funneled into your CTE recruitment pipeline. We know that statistically, students with disabilities are more likely to drop out of high school and are disproportionately represented in adult education programs. Additionally, these students can be very difficult to identify as students with disability because of the degree in which they have cognitive disabilities that are not obvious to identify or require very specific special instruction strategies to provide a reasonable accommodation. So working with the adult education programs who have already identified those students, already are working with them, and know the specific needs they face will not only help you, again, get them the correct information, but when bringing them into your programs will really set you up to have the kind of conversations you need to determine what that student's need is and how you can then achieve it. The last thing I have on there I think is also very important is using current students with disabilities as a recruitment tool, because those students can provide the most honest assessment to other potential students and actively demonstrate that all students can succeed in a CTE program. Again, because we're dealing with the insidious nature of stereotypes, whether it's about students' abilities or the requirements of programs, having students who are currently in your CTE programs, who are being successful in those programs and can act as a form of role model or just an example that some of the stereotypes held are completely without cause, can be a very powerful tool to getting students with disabilities into your programs. The other thing is, if you're using students with disabilities to aid in recruitment, the places they go and interact with other service programs can actually help you develop more of those recruiting partnerships that we're talking about. So now we're going to look a little more closely at the information you need to provide when you're recruiting. We do know that support services are actually a factor that is very highly considered when students with disabilities are making choices for school. Two of the highest rated issues in surveys have been the support services offered and the atmosphere around the school, sort of the inclusive atmosphere, or the idea that students feel like it is somewhere they belong. And so when you're creating recruitment materials, make sure that you include information related to your disability support services, to both for students, and importantly, that you disseminate that to all of your recruiting partners so they have the information they can use in those individual conversations to help students understand that their specific needs can be met. You should also create targeted recruitment material that is designed to send the message that students with disabilities belong in CTE programs because they are capable and have the necessary talent, not the message of if they have the talent, then they belong. I know it seems like it can be a bit of a semantic difference, but again, when you're dealing with stereotypes, it is incredibly important to build self-efficacy with your messaging. Don't send the message that it's a responsibility of the student to ensure that they can be successful. Instead, you want to send the message that they have value, will be successful, and that the programs and services you provide can help them be successful, not that the responsibility is all on them. You should also ensure that all electronic media used in recruitment is designed to be accessible. I can't overstate this enough. As we go forward, more and more of colleges' recruitment material or services or information about services they provide, even essential documents like handbooks and enrollment forms, are generally found first and foremost online. If these aren't designed in the most accessible format possible, they will not be available to students with certain disabilities. So you might have the best support services in the state, but if that access or that information can't even be accessed, then you're not doing the service to your community that you're required to do. I think it's also important to present a realistic picture of the skills involved to work in a field. Again, assumptions about skills needed for a career can act as a barrier, even if they're untrue. So making sure that realistic picture is presented is incredibly important. So before we move on to retention strategies, are there any questions that anyone would like to offer? Let's see. At this time, it doesn't look like it. Again, if you do have any questions as we go forward, feel free to put them in the questions pane, and we would be happy to pause to answer anything you have. But if there are no questions at this time, we'll move on to retention strategies. So when you're attempting to retain students with disabilities, it's really key to help them achieve success and preemptively remove the barriers that could derail their academic progress. So one of the ways that you can kind of preemptively do that is by designing coursework in a way that is delivered to meet the learning styles and learning needs of as many different types of students as possible. So one thing that we recommend is examining the possibility of using alternative instructional strategies to increase learner persistence in the program. Some of these examples include direct instruction, universal design, and strategy instruction. I'm not going to pause too brief or for very long here to go in depth about those specific models. However, if you do want more information or want to have a conversation about some of those instructional models, feel free to reach out to us at ICSPS. We have some very good resources, a lot of knowledge here that we can help you to help you understand those topics. And because you're talking about delivering material in classrooms, this is a very individualized topic in which your instructors and program coordinators and things need to work together to see the way that best suits your programs. So we are happy to provide some of that more personalized service. If you reach out to us, again, we can provide you resources and help talk you through some of the issues with design or using these alternate instructional strategies. We also recommend that you provide learner support programs such as group discussions, individual meetings, active monitoring or mentoring, core academic support, and other community service activities, because again, the idea is that you want to provide services for as many different learning types or individual needs as possible. Implementing comprehensive retention initiatives to target at-risk CTE learners that include orientation and peer mentoring are also incredibly effective. We have seen over and over again that the research has shown that one of the most impactful actions a college can take to increase the retention of special population students are mentoring programs. Whether these are mentoring programs with industry professionals or peer mentoring programs to help students persist by providing support networks, it cannot be overstated how useful these are because they provide both an essential service and actually help build self-efficacy that is so important for students to retain through the completion of a program. We recommend that you engage in an interactive process of determining what other accommodations are needed to achieve successful retention. Again, we really want to recommend that you try to be proactive instead of reactive. It's much more difficult to solve a problem for a student once they've encountered it and are already experiencing a barrier that is hindering their performance in the classroom or in other activities of the program. Whereas instead, if you're actively engaged in a process of determining accommodations that would be useful or would be needed, and constantly reviewing situations that could arise in a program that would present a barrier, you'll be able to deal with those before they present a problem and provide a smoother experience for the student as they go throughout their academic career. Another key element of that is that you provide professional development for instructors and advising staff that allow them to better provide services to students with disabilities. I'm going to go back to the idea of web accessibility real quickly. One of the most beneficial things you can do is train both your instructors and the support staff who put up content onto things like your website or onto online classrooms to create that content in a way that's accessible. That removes a barrier before it exists, instead of requiring a student to encounter a lesson that they don't actually have access to the information and can't understand, or is presented in a way that is confusing or difficult to navigate, and then having to recreate that and retroactively provide them access to that information. By providing the professional development and training, you can ensure that those barriers never exist in the first place. So again, I'm going to pause for questions really quickly before we move on. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask or like to share with the group? I also do want to mention that the handouts that we've created with a lot of this information and much more specific information and detail has been uploaded under the handouts here. It's entitled Disabilities and Recruit and Retention, and it's a PDF, so you have access to that. So, all right, if there are no questions, I'm actually going to hand this over to Jacob. He's our expert today, and he'll be presenting on some of the things going on at Carl Sandburg College. So, if we could make sure he's unmuted.
Hey.
Hi, Jacob.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to get into some of the things that are going on at Carl Sandburg. So the way this is going to work is I have provided Jacob with several questions here, and we're just going to move through them and talk about what Carl Sandburg is doing to provide support for students with disabilities. But before we start, Jacob, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of your school and what's going on there?
Sure. Like Casey said, my name is Jacob Rung. I'm coordinator of academic support services at Carl Sandburg College, which when I'm talking to students, I usually say that should be easy to remember. I support students academically. That means a number of different things. So in addition to doing equipment loans for students who may need laptops, things like that, I coordinate the tutoring center and work with students with disabilities. So I'm actually very lucky. A lot of times I'll say, you know, I'm a one-man office for students with disabilities, but that's not entirely true. Our campus is actually very aware. The culture is such that you know, instructors, staff, are very aware of the need to accommodate students with disabilities, and so a lot of the accommodating that happens, a lot of the support that happens outside our disability support office. So I'm very, very fortunate to have a school like that. So that's about where we're at.
That's great to hear. As I said earlier, one of the key factors can be the atmosphere of a college in terms of student recruitment and retention. So it's really great to hear that you've got other groups at your campus involved as well.
Certainly.
So, all right. And so some of the questions we provide, again, we're specifically focused on recruitment and retention here. So we provided a list, and the first is, how do you market or inform your service area about the services you provide for students with disabilities?
Sure. Well, some of the standard obvious means of reaching out to students with disabilities is in the material that we just make publicly available on our website, through brochures, through information packets, mailings. Um, you know, we got a hold of a list of Department of Education requirements for what should be publicly available on the website, and really took that opportunity to write quite a bit about the process for students with disabilities, or new and prospective students with disabilities, what they need to do to ensure that they're receiving accommodations, that we have the information that we need to support them, that they have those services in place prior to the start of the semester. And so if you check out our website, you'll see quite a bit of that information there, as well as the brochures and things that we mail to students and deliver during visit days. I think what's been most successful beyond just that print material, though, has been really visiting students in the classroom. So I'm invited to a lot of the area high schools students' IEP meetings, typically for the senior, but oftentimes even for their junior year IEP meetings, where I'm able not just to sit down and market Carl Sandburg College, but to talk more generally about transition from high school to college, what students should be expecting as they move from this kind of sheltered high school environment where they have an IEP team and a lot of things are happening in the background, to college where a lot of times it very much feels like they're on their own. They aren't necessarily sure where to go for help. They're not necessarily sure that help exists. And so those meetings are really a great place for me to talk about, yes, there are those services still. Here's how you have to kind of reprogram your mindset, and here's how you can be successful going forward. Here's how to prepare. In addition, we have an annual Knox-Warren Special Education Visit Day for Knox and Warren County schools. They bring their special education students who are college-bound. This year we're doing it a little bit differently and actually hosting a day of transition, not just for the college-bound students, but also for students who are seeking employment immediately out of high school. And so we'll have a lot of area employers on campus, as well as our own representatives and representatives from other community colleges to talk about the college process. And a lot of that comes from what are called TPC, or Transition Planning Committee meetings. I'm not sure how many of those exist in our area, but it's been a great opportunity for people who work with people with special needs and people with disabilities in the area to talk about what transition looks like. And so I represent Carl Sandburg College, of course, on that TPC meeting, but we have the special education coordinator for Knox and Warren County. We have D.D. Holmes, Stonehays Center for Independent Living, Doors, Division of Rehab Services, Bridgeway Mental Health Services. They're all represented in that team, and we really look at what's happening to students and how they're transitioning out of high school, and how we can better inform them of their options.
Well, thanks very much for sharing that. The next question we provided is, what support services do you have in place for students with disabilities at Carl Sandburg Community College? Are there any specific things that you want to share with us that you've seen that are particularly successful, or even difficulties in implementing some of your support services that you'd like to share with the group?
Sure. This is always kind of the tricky question, I guess, in that, I went to a HEAD conference my first year and received some advice from the speaker there, which was that you really shouldn't present a pre-formulated menu of accommodations or a pre-formulated list of this is what we do and here's what we don't do. And so I've kind of run with that, and of course it's caused us some problems, but it's also helped us to really focus on the student as an individual, what they need, what their experience has been like. And so I don't like to go in saying, well, we don't do this, or here's this list of services that we can provide you, but this is outside of our purview. It's always, what do you need? What can we provide for you? And we do that every semester. I meet with, whether by phone or email or in person, though I, of course, prefer in person. I meet with all the students who are requesting accommodations on our campus, and we talk through those needs and how we can provide for them. Of course, we have some guidelines as to why we would approve an accommodation versus not approve another one. That of course presents some challenges, especially for CTE students, where a lot of times we need to defer to the instructors who really know more about the criteria with which someone can be a proficient welder or a proficient nurse or whatever the case may be. But there's always that kind of guiding principle of what can we do to help students to succeed? What do they need versus what do we do versus not do? So that's basically our approach to providing services with for students with disabilities.
Great. All right. So how do students and faculty then learn about those support services, especially considering you said that there is a really individualized approach? Where would they go to find out what is and isn't available to them?
Sure. I've kind of covered how students learn about those services, and a lot of it really, I think, needs to be interactive. That's why I do require a conversation with the student before we approve accommodations for a specific semester. And those accommodations all go into what's called a letter of accommodation. I know different schools call them different things. But the letter actually contains some standard language for covering what disability support looks like at Sandburg, as well as links to some resources detailing the processes and some of the philosophical goals of disability support. And that letter goes out to instructors. It's a really instructor-focused letter more so than a student-focused one. So the instructors will receive that via email at the start of each semester or whenever a student requests accommodations throughout the semester. And that's really their invitation to learn more about disability support at Sandburg, and an invitation into a conversation of why we do what we do, and really kind of assuaging fears of there's always someone that's concerned about compromising course goals and things like that. So I think some of this language that we've crafted and this way we have of disseminating this information has helped a lot in heading off some of those concerns. It's kind of been a big change from the previous letter of accommodation. When I first started here, it was a piece of paper, it had the student's name and ID number, and then handwritten, can take tests outside classroom, extended time for tests, and that was about it. Now I've got a list of the most commonly used accommodations. It's got a description of who instructors can contact for more information. If they're testing outside the classroom, where do they send the tests? What if they're in Bushnell? What if they're in Carthage? Which are some of our extension sites. So it's really about presenting all that information up front to faculty in particular. In addition to just the letters of accommodation, we have an FTLC on campus. It's the Faculty Teaching and Learning Association. And they have a session on disability support. In particular, how to craft documents that are screen reader accessible, that are captioned, etc. They have a session on disability support at every faculty workshop, which is an annual thing. In addition, I'm presenting this January at Faculty Assembly on serving students with autism, which has been kind of a growing population at Sandburg for a while.
All right. And just as a side note, when doing some of the research for this webinar, I was able to view Carl Sandburg's website, and they've produced some very valuable documents on how to produce things that are web accessible, and they then host it on their website to make available to their community. So I would highly encourage anyone who has the chance to actually check out Carl Sandburg's website and see some of the resources they've produced. They are very valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So what would you describe as some of your most successful recruitment and retention strategies then when dealing with students with disabilities?
Yeah, again, I think it's anything that involves personal interaction. If we can get them on campus, and we do that frequently, we always encourage students to sign up for individual or group tours, get them into classrooms. But as far as disability support in particular and getting that disability support information across, it seems like a lot of it's getting involved with the high schools, like you mentioned in your presentation, knowing the special education teachers and the 504 coordinators in the area high schools, being willing to go out and meet with students one-on-one. It's something that takes a lot of time and a little bit of driving a lot of the time, but it's absolutely worth it. And then you know the students that are coming in as well. You have it just facilitates a much smoother process in getting disability documentation and knowing in advance if you're going to need a sign language interpreter, even just knowing the temperament and the inclinations a student has had in high school, and be able to say, okay, well, you've had some problems with attendance in the past. This is something we're going to work on once you come here. Here are some goals that we can set for you. You know, there's some challenges with this area and this demographic. We're a community with a pretty high population of individuals with disabilities, a lot of them kind of on the lower end of the cognitive spectrum. There aren't a lot of opportunities here for those types of individuals who in getting work. And we're an open enrollment college. So we have dealt with some challenges of people from the community who come and are passing the placement test, so obviously are capable of reading and comprehending what they read at least an 8th grade level, but who have really struggled in the classroom. And so even getting out to those communities, I've visited our local KCCDD to talk about college and the expectations for college. It's really a lot about contact at all opportunities in all places as much as possible, and not just sending a mailing, not just giving a call, but coming, talking to them one-on-one. I'll also mention that a lot of the students who sign up for accommodations at Sandburg don't necessarily start thinking, I'm going to come and get disability support services. So again, that community cultural attitude that we have, you know, advisors are aware of disability support services. There's one in particular, anytime he's speaking, one of his favorite phrases is "talk to Jake." So "talk to Jake" gets circulated around a lot. So there's a lot of referral that happens as well.
Right. It's excellent to hear how you've actually incorporated a very individual focus in terms of meeting the needs of students with some ways in which you attempt to limit the structural barriers engaged through the college to develop buy-in and build these partnerships. So that's absolutely fantastic to hear. Let me see. So you've talked a little bit about some of the barriers and challenges that you encountered in serving students with disabilities and some of the partnerships you've developed through the high schools and community groups, are there any specific other community partnerships you want to mention really briefly?
Let's see. I think we've kind of covered a lot of that. I think just to go back to students kind of entering into the college environment being either unprepared or not knowing necessarily what the expectation is, sort of the backlash of having that awareness as a college community that we should be supporting students with disabilities. I have noticed, and I'm not entirely sure how we're addressing this yet, but there have been some situations where students have certainly underperformed and yet passed due to kind instructors. And so there's been a bit of an issue with a couple of students that spring to mind of really stringing them along. And so I think a lot of times, and that sounds like a very negative perspective. I don't mean it to be, but it seems like there's something that we need to do to be a little bit more clear about expectations and clear about how to really prepare the student for the next step and not just kind of pass students along. And that's been a pretty rare occurrence, but definitely a challenge we faced probably within the last year.
Well, that's absolutely true, because the goal is student success later on in life, not just in the college atmosphere.
Right.
So in that case, do you have any closing statements, anything you want to share with everyone before we go that aren't related to some of these questions?
No, I think I suppose in a nutshell, it's my mantra is get in contact with students, treat them as they are, as individuals who have individualized needs, who have their own specific backgrounds, their own specific challenges, rather than saying this is what we can do for a student on the autism spectrum. We're understanding that the autism spectrum is very broad, understanding that one student's experience with a particular disability isn't necessarily another's, and really treating them as individuals. That seems to be kind of the core of what we do.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us today. We really appreciate it. At this point, does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask Jacob or address to myself?
We do have one question, Casey. Can Jacob share the copy of the letter of accommodations?
I certainly can. Yeah, Casey, I'll email that to you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. What we can do is there will be a follow-up email that comes out to all the participants today and anyone who actually missed the webinar as well, and we will provide links to an archived version of this webinar, the documents that we've shared, and then we will include that example for all of you in there. If we come up with any other relevant resources for you, we might also include that in that. All of that will also be accessible through the ICSPS website in our archives along with this webinar as well. So with that, as I said, you can visit the ICSPS website at icsps.illinoisstate.edu, and there you'll be able to find this and other useful resources. We really appreciate that everyone is able to join us today, and we'd like to thank you for your participation. So thanks, Jacob.
All right, thank you.